This year we have been sharing with the wider community, all faculty and staff, and with you, the writings of Brenda Salter McNeil and Rick Richardson, The Heart of Racial Justice. We were able to bring Dr. McNeil to the campus on a day we found. We created a travel day for our students on the day after Easter and invested that time on campus talking about racial harmony. And we were able to have Dr. McNeil with us. She's a wonderful presenter, and she is a consultant who helps us to, and campuses across this country, to get organized and to deal with the issue of racial harmony. Quite frankly, we felt that it was important to bring her up to speed about where this campus is and where the Church of God is. We know that she had a worshiping life with us in our Pasadena church while she was in graduate school at Fuller Theological Seminary. But we took the occasion in presenting her, to introduce her to some of the history of this campus and people who've made such a difference here in the life of the Church of God. And I want to reflect a little bit with you on some of that history, with the thought that perhaps if it hasn't been in your minds recently, you might recall how many ways we have been on this journey together. When the folks at 62nd and Langley Avenue in Chicago, the Langley Avenue Church of God, decided to honor their deceased pastor, S.B. Dunn, they raised a very significant amount of money to help us build Dunn Hall, and it was dedicated to his memory. And E.J. Morris, the primary associate who led that church for so many years, was instrumental in helping us to make that possible. At the time, we recognized the building as one of the first on a predominantly white campus to bear the name of an African American. That is just emblematic of a history that so very much belongs with this campus. Across the years, we have been engaged, sometimes quietly and sometimes quite dramatically, in what we know historically as the Civil Rights Movement. Persons like Willie Barrows and Claude and Addie Wyatt are significant personalities in the Chicago area who were a part of the core inner leadership of Operation Push and other effective organizations in the very early life of persons like Jesse Jackson. Robert Culp, our former board member and significant church leader, was one of the individuals during the time of the uprisings that occurred at these months of assassination back in 1968, and in that period of time, he happened to be the president of the local chapter of the NAACP. He was on the top of the car in the middle of a city that was about to burst, and he was the personality that made such an enormous difference there. And of course, it was James Earl Massey in Detroit, who was always in the inner circle with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he came into the area, and whose voice was heard with such clarity in that city in those times of crises. On this campus, Dr. Robert Reardon decided that we needed to have an expression, a meaningful expression of our concerns for the development of racial harmony in the city. And so some of us were in chapel the day when we decided to have a walk, I mean it was decided beforehand, down 8th Street to the old county hall, and we made that walk. And the young man who was walking beside Dr. Reardon at that time was a young man named Stoney Cooks. Stoney had come to this campus as a young student. He was still a freshman, I think, might have been a sophomore. He came here to get an education. And what happened to him that day literally drove him off the campus. Not that it was a negative experience, it was a very positive one. But he left this campus at the end of that semester and went to Selma and was a part of the Selma walk across that bridge so many years ago. Became a part of the SCLC with Dr. Martin Luther King, was named National Director of Youth Education. Became a protege with Andrew Young. Ambassador Young went on to be the mayor of Atlanta and ambassador to the UN, and had so many significant leadership roles. And to this day, Stoney Cooks, who never came back to school, and I think never even finished a college degree, took his place in national leadership out of the experiences on this campus. And it was Andrew Young who said to many Church of God leaders, "It is the Church of God that has provided the theological foundation for the civil rights movement." How could he make that claim? He can make that claim the same way that Brenda Salter McNeil and others in preparing this book would describe Samuel Hines, along with Tom Skinner and himself, John Perkins, who wrote the foreword of the book, as the persons who were of the early period of reconciliation ministries. And we know Sam and Delita Hines. Sam was, of course, the great and wonderful leader of the General Assembly, pastor of the church at 3rd Street in Washington, D.C., who had such an impact on South Africa. His leadership was truly remarkable. A Jamaican who came to Detroit to be an interim pastor while James Massey was heading the school in Jamaica. There was a sort of an exchange, and after about 6 years, Dr. Massey came back to Detroit, and the Washington 3rd Street Church was the home for Dr. Hines. His presence there had an enormous impact in that he was a leader of a number of Bible studies with congressional persons, I'm told every Thursday morning. The only regret Tony Hall, a congressman from Ohio, had was that those sessions were not recorded. Because Sam did not write much. Everything he said should have been written. He died all too young. He called all of us to a ministry of reconciliation. By the way, he was appointed to, he was asked to serve on the inaugural committee for Ronald Reagan. And as it turns out, he wasn't a citizen at the time, so he had to decline the invitation. He also did not have a political affiliation. He was never on either side of the aisle and served both with such grace and such power. That is a part of our heritage, and it's a heritage of the church and of this university, and we're grateful for it. If one were to raise the names of the persons making the most impact on the study and the work of racial harmony in this country today, you would have to include the name of Curtis D. Young. Curtis D. Young was a student on this campus, theologically educated here. He took an internship with Sam Hines. He happens to be, as I like to put it, of the white persuasion. But he's considered to be one of the foremost writers and teachers of effective reconciliation ministry. Happens to serve on the staff of Bethel University in Minnesota today. Is the author of a number of books and is on many platforms to help others understand what it means to be doing this work. An extraordinary alumnus of this institution. And I have to mention my friend Frank Watkins. Frank came to this campus to play baseball for Carl Erskine. I have to tell you that. He was so bad a student, we sent him home and said, "Don't come back till you decide to be a student." He graduated at the top of our class in seminary. Went on to Chicago to head up the Near North Side mission. And started going to Chicago Theological School and further graduate studies, and played basketball at noon with a young gentleman named Jesse Jackson. He was Jesse's only white staff member for all these years, and has worked with others in the movement both in Washington and in Chicago. Frank Watkins is a wonderful writer. He wrote the biography of Jesse Jackson, and I mention his name only because he came from St. Louis, had nothing on his mind but baseball, and played some center field for us, and was too slow, and tried out for 14 churches, and nobody liked the way he preached because he probably couldn't preach, but a wonderful writer. And still to this day, he is engaged in stirring ideas at a very challenging level. Frank came and spoke in chapel a couple of years ago. I saw him at homecoming last year. That's a part of our legacy. It is often a reach in many different directions. I have named persons who would be considered to be passionately, biblically conservative people. I've also named people who would describe themselves as so far out, "How could you invite me to your campus?" was one question one of my friends asked me. That's a part of our legacy. Dr. Leith Anderson came to our church fellowship a number of years ago to help us with reorganizational ideas, and he wrote that the Church of God has had a disproportionately large impact on the culture and on Christianity, disproportionate to its size. There is no place where that is more evident than in the issues of racial harmony diversity, and in fact, the impact that this movement has had on what we know historically as the civil rights movement. We have no right to take pride in all of this because some of it was done in spite of us. Some of it was done without understanding and the warm feelings that we are in this together. Nevertheless, it is truly a significant part of our heritage. We continue to learn what it means to be followers of Christ and to be biblical first in all we do, and then to take the challenges which come to us as we try to follow our Lord in reaching out to one another. We're trying to learn new lessons today about what it means to be from so many different places and backgrounds and races and cultures, and to have an impact from a biblical perspective that makes a difference. We have a great heritage in the Church of God. I've just named a few people, and the list could go on and on. There are so many others who, in a contemporary way, need to be added to the list. Ben Reed, Ron Fowler, Timothy Clark, Paul Shepard, Dr. Cheryl Sanders, who will bring our commencement address this year, impacting our world as persons who have been or are contemporary spokespersons who will be in the inner city of discussion about how this society of ours will right its ways into the future. We're blessed to be in this discussion. It's not always comfortable. It's not always been comfortable on this campus. We've learned how we have hurt the feelings of people we wanted to love and welcome. But we've learned from that, and they've been generous with us. And this has been a time over the last 3 or 4 years when we've had a very active diversity committee that has talked straight with each other. It's helped us to read and understand what this task is about. I've told our friends across this campus there are many issues we can lean on to move forward. I'm talking about now, what truck will you push down the road? There are many, many causes that can come into our life. I've decided that for us, because of our historic relationship within the Church of God, and because of the mission we should have, if we have this kind of history, we should have a stronger presence on this campus of some of the brightest, most promising, and struggling, and most needy of young people from a vast variety of backgrounds, Hispanic and Latino, and African American, and Caribbean, and Asian of all sorts. We should be at the center of that. We know more about the idea, the theological idea of the oneness of God's people. And with that comes an enormous responsibility that should be institutionalized in an institution like Anderson University. So that's what we're about. Again, helping young people to join the conversation, coming from ignorance we invited, and learning all the way, making mistakes, saying all the wrong things, and having to be taught how to clean up our act. That's all what we are a part of. It's called education. It's also called, I think, being a part of God's kingdom.